Hi, the purpose of this video is to learn how to solve one-step equations showing our work. You'll notice that a lot of these questions you'll be able to do the math in your head, but again, the emphasis is how do we show our work? The reason why I really want to emphasize on showing our work, being neat and organized about this is because eventually the equations will get more difficult. So it's really important that we understand and get a good foundation with one-step equations before we move on to two-step equations. All right, so let's get started. Question A says x minus 8 is equal to 3. Okay, so I'm going to start, I always like having a heading, so I'm going to start with the word solve. Technically, it's not mandatory, just so we're clear. You don't have to write the word solve, but I do like writing that. Okay, all right, so the original problem is x minus 8 is equal to 3. So anytime we're asked to solve an equation, that means that we're trying to get the variable by itself. The variable represents a number, and we're trying to figure out what that number is. So you could always use guess and check and just sort of fill in the blank, like, okay, well, what number has to go there? If I have a number minus 8, and it's supposed to be equal to 3, what's that number? And again, you could probably do that math in your head. However, there are going to be circumstances where it would be challenging to do those numbers in your head. For example, if you have a negative number, or if you have a decimal, if you have some kind of rational number there, then it could be difficult. So the trick that will always work with solving equations is to use the inverse operation. So I highlighted minus 8 for a reason. X in this problem is not by itself. I have not solved for x yet because I have an operation next to x, all right? So I have to get rid of that operation. So anytime you're trying to decide what to do in your first step, you have to look at where the variable is, all right? So in this case, we have x minus 8. So to get rid of subtracting 8, we have to use the inverse operation. So, and that would be addition, by the way. So I'm going to add 8 to get rid of 8. All right, so I'm going to, and if you think about it, negative 8 plus 8, that's 0. So that's why those cancel out. So if you do the math in your head and you're thinking, well, when I use the inverse operation, the numbers didn't cancel out, that probably means that you didn't use the correct operation, or maybe you used the incorrect number. All right. Okay, now here's the thing. If we add 8 to one side of the equal sign, we have to add 8 to the other side of the equal sign. So we're left with x is equal to 3 plus 8 is 11. So we had to think about that. But that's our final answer. Because the 8's canceled out, I'm just left with x by itself. So that's how I know I'm done with the problem, because I don't have any numbers or operations that are affecting x. So if I read this out loud, it literally says x is equal to 11. Now if I go back to my problem, the original problem was x minus 8 is equal to 3. So if I replace x with the number 11, so 11 minus 8, and hopefully you're doing the math there, 11 minus 8 is equal to 3. So that's how I can check my answer in my head. Again, the questions are going to get more advanced, so I typically ask for you to show your work with a check. However, with this video, I really just want to emphasize on how to solve the equations. So I'm not going to be going over the checks in this video. That is something that we'll work on in future lessons. Let's move on to question B. So our problem is y plus 5. That was supposed to be a highlighter, sorry. Y plus 5 is equal to 9. All right, so let's solve. So solving means that we're getting the variable by itself. So what is y? What does that number represent? I'm sorry, what number does y represent? So we have plus 5 here. Y is not by itself because we're adding 5. So we need to use the inverse operation. So the inverse operation of addition is subtraction. So I'm going to subtract 5. So we're going to just check and make sure, did we use the right operation? 5 minus 5, do those numbers cancel out like we want it to? 5 minus 5 is 0. So those cancel out, and that's what we want because our ultimate goal is to get y by itself. So I'm going to subtract 5 on the other side to keep that equality, that balance. So y is equal to 9 minus 5 is 4. So that's your final answer. Y is equal to 4. So if I go back up here to my original problem, we said y was equal to 4. So 4 plus 5, and I want you to stop and think about that for a second. Don't just assume that you're right, because the check is sort of pointless if you're not actually calculating that. 4 plus 5 is 9, and that's what you're supposed to get. They told us over here that when we plug y or substitute y for a number, we're supposed to get 9. So it has to be 4. Y is equal to 4. So we are able to conclude that our answer was correct. All right, fabulous. Let's move on to question C. So here we have C minus 10 is equal to 4. We want to use the inverse operation. So instead of subtracting 10, we are going to add 10. So negative 10 plus 10, that's 0. So I use the right operation, and I'm going to add 10 to the other side of my equal sign now. So C is equal to 14. All right, so that concludes question C. I'll just make a note here about showing work. I always line the numbers up because you're doing vertical addition, meaning you're adding the numbers up and down. So I always try to, I'm going to highlight this so you guys can see what I mean. I always try to make my numbers line up so that way I know specifically what should be canceling out and what I'm adding to what and things like that. So that way in my next step, I'm organized and I know what's canceled out and I know what to add. It just makes it easier for you to read, and it also makes it easier for someone else to read, such as your teacher who might be grading your paper or quiz. So just be mindful of that as you're working on the next few problems. All right, so question D. The problem is t plus 6 is equal to 17. So the inverse operation, if we were to get t by itself, we're looking to get rid of adding 6. So the inverse operation of addition is subtraction. So before I move on, I'm going to check. Positive 6 minus 6 is 0. So those two cancel out. So I'm going to subtract 6 from 17 as well to keep that equality. And therefore, I'm left with t on the left side of the equal sign. And on the right side of the equal sign, I have 17 minus 6, which is equal to 11. So my final answer is t equals 11. Another small thing, whenever I show my work, I always circle my final answer so that way when I'm doing my check, your eyes are sort of drawn to the circled number. So anything that I want to stand out, particularly my answer, I'll circle it. So I circled t equals 11. All right, let's move on to the back. So here are some challenge questions. It says use the integer addition and subtraction rules to solve for the variable. So these are considered challenge questions because we are going to have some negative numbers in the mix, and we're going to have to use our integer rules to solve some of these variables. All right, so let's take a look at question E. So we have p minus 1 is equal to negative 6. So I'm going to solve. Okay. P minus 1 is equal to negative 6. So we're solving for the variable. We're trying to figure out what number does P represent. So I'm going to use the inverse operation. Okay, so instead of subtracting 1 like I have in my equation, I'm going to add 1. So negative 1 plus 1, that is equal to 0. That's why they cancel out. Now I'm going to add 1 to the other side. And I'm left with P is equal to negative 6 plus 1. And I'm just going to write off here. This is going to be my scrap work. Negative 6 plus 1. We learned that when you add a negative and a positive number, you have to find the difference, right? So negative 6 plus 1, if I find the difference, that's 5. But my answer is negative 5 because the longer arrow is a negative number. So if we're thinking about this problem on the number line, Negative 6 plus 1 would mean I went to the left 6 on the number line, and then I went to the right 1. My solution is in the negative zone on my number line. So that's why my solution is negative 5. So P is equal to negative 5. So my scrap work helped me calculate that sum. All right, so that's question E. Question F, we have m plus 10 is equal to negative 4. So we're solving for m this time. M plus 10 is equal to negative 4. Okay, so we need to use the inverse operation of addition. As of right now, we have m plus 10. So we have to use the inverse operation of addition, which is subtraction. So subtract 10 on both sides. 10 minus 10 is 0. Boom, that's gone. So I'm left with m on the left side of the equal sign. So m is equal to, and then over here, I'm going to highlight the numbers that are being subtracted. I have negative 4 minus 10. I have to remind you that subtraction, actually any problem where there's negative numbers, you really have to think back to the rules because they don't always turn out the way they seem. I guess that's how I would word it. So if I have negative 4 minus 10, another way of looking at that is negative 4 plus negative 10. We learned that subtracting is the same as adding the opposite. So these two problems, negative 4 minus 10 and negative 4 plus negative 10, they are equal. They represent the same number. Now this is easier for us to calculate. Negative 4 plus negative 10 is negative 14. So that's my final answer. So m is equal to negative 14. So in our heads, anytime we have a subtraction problem, particularly dealing with negative numbers, we want to convert that to an addition problem. Okay, so our final answer is m equals negative 14. So now let's move on. I just have 2 more problems. So question G, we have x minus 9 is equal to negative 12. All right, so the inverse operation of subtracting 9 is adding 9. So I'm going to add 9 here. So negative 9 plus 9, that's 0. So I'm going to add 9 over here to maintain that equality. And that step, by the way, I probably should have said this earlier, you want to show what number you're adding or subtracting. So that way, the person that's looking at your paper isn't guessing, and it could be you. If you are, even if it's your paper, if you haven't looked at it in a while, you may not remember how you got your answer. So if you write plus 9, as opposed to just writing the number 9, because I've seen that a lot. So you want to show, are you adding 9? Are you subtracting 9? Eventually, you will do problems where you're even multiplying and dividing as well. So it's really important that you include that operation in your work. Okay, so the 9's canceled out and we're left with x equals, and I'm going to write my scrap work over here. So I have negative 12 plus 9. So here's another situation where I have a negative number and I'm adding a positive number. So again, I need to find the difference. 12 minus 9, so the difference means I'm subtracting. 12 minus 9 is 3. But I know that I went farther to the left on the number line. My longer arrow, my larger absolute value, is a negative number. So again, that's my reason for having a negative solution. Negative 12 plus 9 is equal to negative 3. So in my final answer, I'm going to write x is equal to negative 3. You'll notice I have my scrap work off to the side, so that way it isn't going to make a mess of where I'm showing my work to solve the equation. It's good, again, that's why I title things, so that way it can easily navigate through my work, and I know if I made a mistake, I know where to look, and that sort of thing. So scrap work, such as showing that you're adding or subtracting numbers, like this stuff over here, you want to have that off to the side, as I said. Okay, let's move on to the last problem. We have k plus 5 is equal to negative 2. So instead of adding 5, I need to use the inverse operation. So I'm going to be subtracting 5 on both sides of the equal sign. So 5 minus 5 is 0. So that cancels out, and I'm left with just k equals, and then I have some math to do off to the side. Here's my scrap work. So I have -2 take away 5. So I'm subtracting, I'm taking away from a negative number. So -2 plus -5, subtracting is the same as adding the opposite, so that's why I changed that problem. -2 plus -5 is equal to -7. So I'm going to come back over here and write my final answer. K is equal to -7. So that's my final answer for H. So I hope that you found this video helpful. This certainly takes practice, and I know that there are other ways that we can show solving for equations, and so if you want to have a conversation with me about that, that certainly is a good idea, just so that we can be on the same page, because as I said, we want to smooth over any questions that you guys have before we move on to more complicated problems that have two steps, because two-step equations is our next unit in math. All right, so thank you for watching this video. I hope that it helped, and as I said, just ask me questions if you need it. Thanks. Bye, guys.